Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar where I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Adam Boddison, OBE and CEO of the Association of Project Management. Just before we go any further today, where we will be talking about topics that affect the future of project management, I'd just like to remind you all that today's session is intended to be interactive, so please do use the Q&A function within Zoom to ask questions as we go through, and I promise to ask as many of those to Adam as we are able to over the course of the next hour. So good afternoon, Adam. Lovely to have you here. I was wondering if we could start this afternoon. Some of our listeners will know certainly of your role, etc., but many won't have had the chance perhaps to hear you in person or know much about you. Can you give us a little intro about what journey you've been on to get to where you are today?
Of course, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. It's a real pleasure. So in terms of my journey, I'd say, first of all, I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool project professional, although I have done the qualifications, and maybe we'll come back to that a little later. But my background is actually as an educationalist. So I started life as a secondary school maths teacher, ended up teaching in primary school for a short while, which was a real learning curve for me, and I've had a few of those in my career. But it's that background in what I call education and enterprise which has really led me to APM, because after teaching in schools I went on to work at the University of Warwick, where I ran the teacher training department and also ran various international education programs. From there I moved into the charity sector, and it was my first stint, if you like, in a professional body. And for 6 years I ran a national inclusion charity, which was also a professional body for SENCO, so special educational needs coordinators in schools in England. And from there I got the bug, I suppose, of the impact that professional bodies could have. But I wanted to broaden my impact out to beyond schools alone. And when the APM role came up, I thought, well, how brilliant, because it's every sector. And it's all about change and transformation and doing that for the public good, to make a difference to society. What a great move it was. I've been at APM now for 3 years and really enjoyed every single day of it.
Fantastic. And you mentioned there that when you took to the helm just over 3 years ago, you said you haven't come from a project background. How important did you feel that was when you took up the role of leadership within the APM?
Yeah, it's not a unique problem for me anyway, because it's something I've faced once before. So when I joined the National Inclusion Charity, I didn't have a background in special needs or inclusion. I do remember being at the interview, and they kind of have the board of trustees there, the chair in the middle, a bit like the Last Supper, for your watchers here. And the first question was, Adam, what makes you think you would have any credibility in this role? Bearing in mind you don't know anything about special needs. And the answer I gave there, I think, also applies to the APM role, which is when you're running a professional body, you need somebody who understands what a professional body is about and how that runs. You don't necessarily need a kind of subject domain expert. In fact, these organisations are filled with those types of experts and expertise. What you need is someone who can harness that expertise. When the question came up in my APM interview, part of the answer I gave was to give assurance more than anything to the interview panel, was that I was willing to undertake the qualifications, and I agreed to them within my first 2 years. I don't know if I quite met the 2-year deadline, but I certainly did them not long after that. And of course the PMQ, the project management qualification, I did with yourselves here at Provek.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm pleased to see you passed.
I did,
well,
first time,
which is fantastic. So in terms of then the APM and the role of the APM, what do you see, in a world that's ever changing at the moment, what do you see as the primary purpose of the Association of Project Management?
It's really interesting when you've got an organisation like APM, because it has these, I call them multiple identities. Mm-hmm. So on the one hand, it's a professional body that we've talked about, so it's a guardian of qualifications and standards, and it exists to maintain and improve the standards of project delivery, to improve project success, if you like. So that's fine. But then also it's a membership association. So that's about community. It's about bringing professionals together with their peers to share best practice and kind of cross-pollination of effective practice and so on. But then, of course, we've got a corporate community. So, this is businesses who want to deliver projects as part of their, their DNA, if you like. It's what they do. And so they're investing in APM because they're looking for a return on investment, a kind of commercial investment, if you like. And they want us to represent their views, for example, to government. So then we become a bit like a kind of trade association, a union in some ways. So you can see we have all of these different multiple identities. The one that really overshadows everything else, though, I think, is our charitable status and our status as a royal chartered body, because what they are about is actually existing for the public benefit, that everything we do is going to make the world a better place, it's going to improve society. It's one of the reasons I'm so pleased we have the strapline that we have at APM, which is because when projects succeed, society benefits. It means that everybody who's involved in a project or in the periphery of a project, yes, they might really enjoy the technical side of it. I've definitely met some of those people, but actually they're in it because of the impact that those projects are going to have, and that's what gets me out of bed every morning.
Yeah, which is fantastic as well. If you were talking, because obviously many people may not care or may not think that's important, having a charitable status, what would you be saying to those people that are in the project profession who maybe don't think that's important? Why do you think it is important to have that connection? Why is it in their interest to appreciate that connection?
One of the great things about being a charity is that we don't have money that comes into the organisation that goes out to kind of shareholders or anything like that. It means that any surplus that we generate actually goes back into the profession itself. So that could be about, more resources for the community. It could be about helping to educate the wider world on the impact and benefit of projects. It could be about developing the kind of qualifications and standards that we have. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you like, to make the impact of the profession better and better and better over time, without having to dilute that because we're worried about shareholders and profit and all of that. If we make a surplus and we can reinvest it, that's great, but that's not the primary driver of what we're about. We're about social impact.
Fantastic. And that's very compelling. Just wanted to pick up on one of those communities, because as you rightly said, it's quite an interesting fabric of different communities. Many of the people that will be listening today will be people that are perhaps actively in the consumer of being a project manager and looking to the profession. So just want to get to the heart of, who do you feel it represents, the APM? Because I know sometimes there's debate about, does it include project controllers? Is it more for project managers? Is it for administrators? In answering that, and for anyone who may have concerns listening, what would you say are the people it represents?
Part of the challenge we have is our name, actually. Yeah. We're called the Association for Project Management, and some people therefore say, that means the APM is only for project managers. It's much broader than that. It's part of the reason why when we created the chartered standard, we made it a chartered project professional, not a chartered project manager, because it's to represent that full breadth of roles that exist within the profession. You mentioned some of them there, project controls, people who are working in risk, people who are running project management office, project sponsors even, there's a whole range of different roles, and we are the professional body for the full breadth of project professional roles. In fact, it's one of our, if you look at our kind of 5-year strategy and you look in there, and it talks about APM being a professional body for all project professionals. And I would add to that, including all the list of people that we've just talked about. So it is for everybody. And we've made practical steps to make that practically applicable too. So if I think about the chartered standards as a good example, one of the bits of feedback we had when we first launched that standard was that for someone who was a director of project controls, for example, they would say it was really hard to kind of bend my experience, if you like, to fit in with the requirements of chartered status. And so what we did was we changed the balance of core requirements and core competencies to demonstrate and those which were optional, so that actually individuals could tailor their application to become a chartered project professional to make it work for the particular role that they were in. And we now have people who are directors of project controls, people who are project sponsors, people who are traditional project managers as well, getting that chartered status, and it now works for them. So that's the kind of commitment that we've made.
And I think it's a really nice term, using the term project professional, because I think we all know no two projects are the same, and the mix of people involved in eventually creating a successful project is broad. It's not one thing. So would you actually argue, because I know sometimes there's some debate about should we be unifying and having a homogenous body that can represent all, or should we be fragmenting it and breaking it down, have specialists in this and specialists in that? What would be your comment about that, about the dangers or otherwise of going down too specialist a route?
Yeah, well, I think you've described kind of the two extremes of, of a spectrum,
absolutely.
both of which I think are problematic for different reasons. So I think if you had one body that tried to do everything for everybody, the chances are it probably wouldn't quite work for anyone. And equally, if you end up with something so fragmented, I think you actually detract from what is a really rich, diverse profession. So there has to be a kind of level of pragmatism and a middle ground here. And for me, that middle ground is around a whole range of professional bodies actually playing nicely together and recognising that a rising tide kind of lifts all ships, as it were, and that there is a contribution to be made from lots of different bodies. That said, I do think there is a challenge. I talked about the terminology before, the kind of Association for Project Management. There is an issue around management and leadership here, which I think is a problem, irrespective of which specialist elements of the profession you look at, which is that, you know, outside of the profession, everybody wants to be a leader. Nobody wants to be a manager. But the truth is, those who have been a really effective manager or a really effective project manager often are the ones that go on to be the best leaders. So I think there is something there about how do we broaden our profession out to make it relevant to the C-suite, relevant to leaders, and a proper pathway to really effective leadership. That, I think, is a case that still needs to be made, and it can't just be APM making that case. This is a responsibility that I feel lies very broadly across the range of different organisations we've just talked about.
Yeah, and certainly something to balance. In fact, we've had a question in, and I think it actually echoes much of what you said, but let me just read it out. Is there a PR challenge so that project management comes to be seen as all the things and people involved in making the change successful, rather than just project managers?
It's a really good question because, and there's two aspects to this. So one, the project profession has an image problem. And it has an image problem because the people inside it can see the value of it, and particularly the value in terms of, for example, strategy execution, which is important to every organisation. But the people outside of the profession, even inside the organisation, but outside the profession, they think the project management is like Gantt charts and spreadsheets and templates and telling me what to do. And so they don't want that. They see it as technical. And there is a technical element of it, but actually the strategic impact that the profession can have, I think, is largely misunderstood. And partly that's because of, you know, this trial by media that happens, where the only thing we hear about in the media in projects is bad news. It's a project that's overspent or gone wrong, often publicly funded projects, but there's plenty of privately funded projects in that space as well. We don't hear the good stories. So there is an image problem around the profession. So I think that's one aspect of it, is around this kind of the image and the trial by media. I think that the second part of this, though, is around how we convince people that this is a profession in its own right. So sometimes we used to have the strapline at APM where we said project management as a life skill for all. And for me, we don't have that anymore. There's a reason why we don't, because that kind of suggests that it's something anybody can do. Yeah. And I suppose there is an argument that says, I don't know, if I'm planning my wedding, am I running a project? I suppose, but it's a bit like dancing. Bear with me on this one, right? Bear with me. Everybody can dance, but not everybody's a dancer. Right, so you know, we can all go to our wedding and dance. We can all book our holiday and plan stuff, and actually having project skills, would that help you to do that? Yes, but you know, if I use the dance analogy, we're not all, because we can dance at a wedding, claiming that we can be the professional partners on Strictly Come Dancing. No, you know, it's a different level. And so yes, there is a kind of low threshold to this, where there are skills that people can learn which will make them more effective in their day-to-day life and their day-to-day work. But actually that next level of someone being a project professional that can really deliver change and transformation when it's most needed to have the maximum impact, you know, that's something that's different. And that's the bit that's not well understood, I think, at the moment. And that's the image problem that we have.
Yeah, and building on that, because you discussed about the fact it can be quite a transient profession, in the sense that people can come into it and go out of it, and that often those people going out and that have got senior level experience often end up as part of the C-suite, potentially going into other C-suite roles. Do you think one of the image issues is we haven't yet seen a C-suite role for the project professional. There isn't a chief projects officer. Is that a debate we should be having? Is that one that you think is part of the future of project management?
Well, the debate's already started, I'm pleased to say. So we published a paper, it's about 18 months ago now, about the CPO, the Chief Project Officer, and about whether that is an important role to have. I mean, we do see variations on this. So Chief Transformation Officer, we often see in the C-suite. And I think the C-suite broadly is changing, not just in this space, but across the board. So I think there's a much more of a push now towards the kind of EQ rather than IQ type roles. But also, most businesses now that I see are all about change. So if I go back 50 years ago, what were businesses doing? Most leaders were delivering, I'd say the vast majority, 95% of what they were doing was probably business as usual with a small amount of organisational change and development. I'd argue that's arguably completely reversed now. And most leaders are delivering major change, growth, transformation all the time just to kind of stay afloat, and probably a tiny amount of BAU. If that's true, what's the role for a COO now, which is largely about operations? Is that still almost like a deputy type role, if that's only such a small part of your business? Or is it a CPO, Chief Projects Officer or Chief Transformation Officer, that's needed? So I think that's starting to play out already in some businesses. And some of the businesses that we work with very closely, we see them investing in exactly those kinds of roles.
And do you feel there's generally an appetite for that now? Do you think people are receptive, in the businesses you're going into? Are they kind of recognising that dilemma, recognising that change and wanting that? Because it's a different skill set, isn't it? The operator, as it were, the COO, is a different skill type to the project deliverer.
Yes, and I think it is being recognised, but not universally. So of course, the organisations I'm going into would recognise it because, of course, they are more closely linked in with the project profession and with the professional body. So I suppose we get a slightly warped view of the reality. But I think you go a bit further out. You start looking at, for example, the SME market, what's going on there. You start looking at some of the organisations where they haven't really recognised project delivery as a strategic capability. They see it as almost a technical capability in their organisation. It's not there yet, but I think it will come, but it will take time.
Okay, fantastic. So moving that on a little bit in terms of some of the sector challenges, because obviously we're saying the demand is there, the demand for project people are there, which should be good news to many of the people listening today. But what are some of the sector challenges of fulfilling that demand currently?
So part of the challenge, and this is more true in some sectors than others, is that there is a view that in order to be a project professional in a particular sector that you have to have experience in that sector. So nuclear is a great example of this. There is a shortage of project professionals in the nuclear space, but there are some organisations who will say, well, we can't take somebody who's a project professional with an IT background or with a legal services background or because we need someone with nuclear. Now, is that really true? Is it really true? Because let's look at other professions, mature professions. Accountancy. Does anybody think twice about the accountant who moves from nuclear to IT to healthcare to energy to what? No, because actually we're not employing them to be a sector expert. We're employing them because they are a professional accountant, a qualified professional. The same is true for HR, the same is true for marketing. You get the idea. Law, even law, right? So why don't we see the same thing in project management and in the project profession? I don't think it's this view is got any substance to it personally. I think it's a reflection of the lack of maturity of the profession. It's still relatively young, the project profession, compared to engineering and accountancy and so on. So I think that will come. But I think businesses have a role to play in terms of accelerating that journey. And some businesses are, partly out of necessity, they are starting to actually look into other sectors and take people on. And when they do that, they're pleasantly surprised because they find that that they can actually get this kind of cross-pollination of effective practice from other sectors that they didn't traditionally have access to, which is really helping them. So I think they're pleasantly surprised by that, and then it encourages them to do even more.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense to me, because your argument they shouldn't need to be specialists, because we always refer to the project manager as the orchestrator. And as the name suggests, a bit like an orchestra, you'll have many different players. And actually the strength of the project role is on enabling those different disciplines together to deliver outcomes. And I think we've had a question come in around this, actually. Let me just bring that back up. So it says the horizontal stroke cross-functional perspective is important at the C-suite level, e.g. Chief Transformation Officer or Change Officer, etc. This is different to typical roles such as the CIO, COO, CFO, in that they have more vertical functional perspectives. So what's your thoughts? And they say project management is the horizontal specialism. That's what it's saying. So would you concur with that view that's been
Well, it doesn't sound like
shared?
a question. It sounds like a statement,
doesn't it? I say, reading on, it's more of a statement. Absolutely.
So yes, to a point, I can see where they're coming from. I do think it varies by business, though, because I think if you're a large multinational organisation, the kinds of functions that you'd have and the ease of being able to kind of cut across those functions in a horizontal way, in the way that's described or not, can vary. And you take that type of organisation versus a small charity, which is almost like a family business with 10 people. I think it can be quite different. But the principle behind it, I get that. Yeah.
And of course, that is one of to me, I know we said that potentially sometimes the project management profession isn't always viewed as an attractive one. But actually, one of the things that you just mentioned there, I think gives it a lot of attraction, is the sheer breadth and depth of experience. As you just mentioned, they're a small charity. You can be delivering a project that's going to be a very different project to a large global institution. So how important, in your opinion, is it to be working with a range of bodies across different national boundaries and things to help really demonstrate that opportunity and build that profession as we move forward?
Yeah, so you've touched on kind of 2 points there. So one is the range of other partners we might work with globally, but it's also the attractiveness of the profession more broadly. So let me do the second one first and then come back to the international point. So everybody I speak to, I think probably bar a small handful of people, has fallen into the project profession by accident. They've all had some other career. So they were either in an organisation where they ended up delivering projects and then it's kind of become formalised, or they were in another profession. So they were a chartered surveyor, or they were an engineer, or they were, you can imagine the list. And then one day they woke up and found out they weren't doing much surveying anymore, but they were doing lots of project delivery or project leadership. So I think the entry point into the profession has not been deliberate. Now, why is that? That's because in schools, we haven't got children saying, when I grow up, I want to be a project professional. So I don't think that there's actually an issue over the attractiveness of the profession. I think it's just that people don't know about it. And now some people argue, we should have GCSEs in project management and we should have all these qualifications in school. I'm not convinced that's necessary either, because again, if you look at the mature professions, we don't have people doing GCSEs, or not many people doing GCSEs in accountancy and architecture and all of this. They do exist, but the numbers are quite small. That's not the main routine. The main routine is that actually people are championing the profession to young people, and that's something I think we need to do more of globally. Coming back to the other point there around international relationships, one of my kind of sayings, I suppose, mantras in this space is, we may be multiple organisations, but we represent one profession. And therefore I feel that we owe it to the profession to play nicely and work together and collaboratively with each other. And the truth is, we all have different strengths to bring to the table. We all have different qualification offerings. We all have different areas of expertise where we've chosen to focus our time and efforts. And we shouldn't force people in the profession to have to choose one over another. There will also always be a natural allegiance, probably defined by geography or the employer that you work with and who they align with. But actually, via that, there should be a pathway through to being able to work with other professional bodies as well. It's one of the reasons why I'm so pleased that this September we launched the new pathway to chartership, because what that did is it meant that if we have people who've got our own project management qualification, or the PMI's PMP qualification, it means we recognise the professional practice element of those qualifications, and it gives people a faster route to chartership. So that's not about competing. It's it's that rising tide lifts all ships argument again, which says whatever your starting point is, there is always going to be a route through to chartership for you. And that's important.
And that's really important. And I'm going to come back to chartership, but just before I do that, I just want to almost that brings this attractiveness and that making people aware and the whole working with other bodies together. As I understand it, one of the biggest sector challenges facing the profession is supply currently and looking to the future. So, you know, that almost brings together the reasoning for why we need to get people excited about project management and kind of the pipeline of the future. What are your comments around that? Because people may be thinking, you know, is this a safe profession? Is it going to offer me a future? What would you be saying to them about that to reassure them?
There are huge supply issues here, so you'll never be out of a job, that's for sure. To put to kind of quantify this a little bit, you know, one of the reports that we put out earlier in this year was the Golden Thread research, which we commissioned PwC to do for us, and it was a follow-on from a similar report they did for us back in 2019. And that research showed that by 2030, we're going to need an additional 25 million project professionals globally. I mean, 25 million, that's a huge number. And that's just for what we want to deliver today. You know, that what we've got planned in the pipeline. Of course, more things are going to come in, because what's going to be happening by 2030? Well, all these commitments that people have made to the UN sustainability goals, so all of this is going to kind of ramp up, you know, more so than it has done in the past. We look at what's going on in the Middle East, particularly in Saudi Arabia, for example, where you've got these kind of giga projects, you know, NEOM and the Line and all of it, and they're kind of hoovering up project professionals from all around the world because they can pay them a lot more. So that puts even more of a supply pressure on. So there is definitely a huge supply challenge, and the question is, where are they all going to come from? Now, we can't say, we talked about schools before, we can't say, well, we're going to get them all from schools, because it takes too long. You know, 2030 is not far away, 6 years away, right? So we can't wait for that. The truth is, it's all about sector switching and career changing. People change careers now more often than was ever the case in the past. And one of the great things about the project profession is, unlike probably any other profession, the entry points are really broad. So you can almost take any professional background that you've got and it will add value to your role as a project professional. You can't do that with medicine. You can't say, oh, well, I did 10 years as a senior architect, therefore I want to come straight in as a paediatric consultant. No, you're back to medical school day one, right? You've got to start from scratch. Actually, we can take those people, and that experience and expertise that people have will add value to the profession and to their own career. And that's what we're going to have to do to meet these kind of supply and demand issues.
Which does make it really exciting for people listening. I mean, you know, the very fact that you're able to do that within project management makes it a very exciting place. Got a question that's kind of related to this that's come in around some of the skills we may need for that. So the question here is, what is your view as regards AI and the future of project management? I have witnessed discussions around this question where some project professionals think the future of project management would be fully AI automated, which I find a bit optimistic. What are your thoughts on that, Adam?
Yeah, I would agree, that sounds very optimistic. Will it change what we're doing in the project profession? Definitely, without a doubt. In fact, it already is. The implication behind the question that's been asked there is that we won't need project managers anymore because everything will be done by AI. I heard the CEO of Gleeds talking recently at an event, and he said something which kind of stuck with me. He said AI can do a lot of things, but it can't lay bricks. You know, and you know, it was kind of obviously meant it's a bit of a laugh, but actually you can take that argument and translate it to a lot of other things, because the truth is, when you think about projects that have been successful and projects that have failed, what was the difference? You know, what made one fail and one successful? Processes is definitely part of it, but it's often people that are the determining factor. You know, it's those leadership skills, that kind of really effective stakeholder engagement, that, you know, commitment to diversity and inclusion. All of those types of things are the things which actually make the difference. You know, it's often a really dynamic project leader who really understood how to get the most out of their team and balance the kind of, the client's expectations with what, the practical reality was, all of that stuff. I'm not convinced that AI can do that. And in fact, it will have the opposite effect. If AI kind of takes away the kind of automated aspects of project management, so it does all of the kind of the handle turning stuff, then what's left? It's all people stuff. So we're going to get even more dependent on good people. And there's another element to this too as well. So what happens when we say, I don't know, we assume that AI is going to do all risk for us? Because I've heard this said before. There are people out there who say, we won't need risk professionals anymore because AI will, make risk registers up and it will put all the mitigations in place and everything else. So let's imagine we're in that world. And, I've got my report of which the AI spit out on risk here for me. How do I know it's a good one? Who is it that's going to say, that looks about right, the sniff test, if you like. Yeah. I'm going to need a risk professional. And by the way, I'm not going to need just any old risk professional. I'm going to have a flipping good one, because this is going to be someone who can come in right at the end of a process without having kind of been involved in the steps to get there, and look at the output, and at that point be able to point out the things that aren't right in there, because there's bound to be hallucinations. Actually, is it worth me talking about hallucinations?
Yeah, but just before it is, and I definitely want you to go there, but just before we go there, I mean, from what I'm hearing you say, the whole AI debate, the most important thing here is it's not binary, number one. That actually what it's going to do is shift the skill set of the project managers we do. You're already saying about, we shouldn't, I think getting rid of the automated stuff, I think we're probably all on board. Yeah, let's get the just turning the wheels stuff out the way. But even with the predictive stuff that it might be able to do, and with the advance of tools like Microsoft Copilot and so on, it's still not going to be able to make those kind of qualitative decisions around, does this look right? Is it in the right format? And is this kind of where you're going with some of this?
Well, I think it can make the decisions.
Yeah.
The problem is, how do you know if it's a good decision?
It's a good decision.
And I think that's the point I'm getting at, because the AI will always tell you it's a good decision. It'll say, look, here's all my sources, this is what I've done, isn't it a great decision? But these could be pretty high stakes decisions. If you're talking about big infrastructure projects, are we just going to completely trust the computer? We're going to need these assurance roles. And my message would be to anybody who's got really good risk people or other people in functions where there might be tasks that are lost to the AI. I'd say keep hold of the good people you've got, because you're going to need them in an assurance role going forward.
And I think you were going to mention about hallucinations, because that's one of the things I remember you talking to me about that you learnt quite early on. And it's a great story to share, because I think our listeners will appreciate it.
Yes, no, absolutely. So for those who don't know what a hallucination is, so the AI hallucination is when the AI makes something up, but it's not completely invented. It's kind of based on logic, but it's a kind of 2 and 2 makes 15 type situation. Yeah. But the AI is not trying to trick you or to catch you out. It is basing its output on a logical set of processes. But a human would look at this output and go, it's ridiculous. So the example I often give is when the police force were using generative imaging for EFITs. Mm-hmm. So the way they actually did this was they got lots and lots and lots of images. I don't know where from, probably from social media, I would guess. And then when you were reporting what somebody looked like who'd committed a crime, they'd use this to kind of generate a potential image of what the person looked like. And what they realised was lots of these kind of headshots that they were producing, they'd often come out with a horizontal line coming through the person's neck. So what's this horizontal line? And it turned out that lots of these pictures they'd uploaded were people standing in front of a horizon. And so the AI said, because that's something that we've seen in lots and lots of images, that must be a feature of a face, like the ears and the eyes and the nose and this horizontal line. And of course, a human looking at this would say, well, that's completely ridiculous. Yeah, but the AI followed logic and said that must be a feature. And that's an example of an AI hallucination. So what companies now who are really invested in this space are doing are building in assurance roles such as anti-hallucinogenic workflows. There you go. Get your tongue around that one. Anti-hallucinogenic workflows to kind of make sure, if you like, that the AI hasn't done something like that, hasn't hallucinated, so they can make sure that what it's coming out with at the end is sensible, and you can use that to go forward with.
Absolutely. And so it should reassure people out there that AI is going to change things, and hopefully for the better as well. But with that, so too is the PM role changing. And I think it's not just AI, it's data in general, data analytics. And I know the APM has done some really useful work around thinking about what kind of level of AI or data literacy do you need? Are there any tools you'd point people toward so that if they are looking to understand that more in the future of project management, where they might go for that?
Yeah, no, thank you. So there's a couple of things. So we have two documents which I think will be particularly helpful. So one is a kind of getting started with project data guide, which is just quite useful to say what on earth are we actually talking about, because it's a bit like the agile conversation. When two people are talking about agile, they might not be talking about the same thing.
Absolutely.
The same is true with AI. We'll be having a conversation about AI and we find we're not actually talking about the same thing. So this getting started guide really kind of says, well, what are we actually talking about when we say AI? What do we mean by project data analytics? So we all talk about the same thing. And then the second resource is a project data skills guide. And what that does is it has different personas in there and kind of starts to say, well, what kind of skills would you need to have if you were in this particular type of role? It's more of a starting point. It's not an exact science because, of course, the roles are all very different. Yeah. But you used exactly the right phrase before, which is we're not saying that people have to be data analysts, but they do need to be data literate. And this kind of provides a baseline, if you like, of data literacy.
And I think that's a great tool for people to go towards, because I love the fact that the personas are kind of based around different community types. And it's, as you say, a way into saying, well, if we're going to be changing the workforce and the skills they need, how can we help this to inform us? So I think it's a great tool out there. We've got another question come in here around, again, the skills. It says, it's often not possible to get training budget for everyone. What would you recommend be the one qualification for a project manager to focus on if there are budget constraints? Secondly, if an individual signs up to APM membership, what should someone expect to get out of it? Great question. I was going to ask you that later, so they've done me a favour there.
Yeah, no. Well, so the second question is easier to answer than the first question, because on the qualifications point, I think so much depends on where you are in your career as to what's the one to invest in. If you're investing, if it's a question as a business, I can only afford one, what should I go for? Then the answer's easy. You go for chartership, because that's the one that actually is about competence. It's the one that's about the license to practice. It's the one that's going to move the dial in terms of project delivery. Mm-hmm. The other qualifications, of course, are important, and they're on that pathway to chartership. And so they will be important if you have a relatively inexperienced workforce and so on, or if they're not quite at chartership level yet, but they want that knowledge and understanding, they want to understand project life cycles better and so on. So I think so much depends on the context with that one, but there's obviously a whole range of qualifications there. I think on the membership point, it's a really interesting question, because people often say to me, "Oh, what's in it for me? If I pay for membership, what's in it for me?" And of course, there's a value proposition, and people will get access to a community of peers. They will get access to resources, APM learning, the magazine. So I can list off all of the kind of benefits of membership. But the main reason that people become a member of any professional body isn't purely because they want the transaction of I give you my money and I want access to all of these services and products. It's because they want to be part of the profession. They want to be in that community of peers. And actually, it's not transactional, it's relational. Yeah. It's how do I not just take from the professional body, but what can I contribute to that as well? Which is why the membership kind of journey, if you like, starts with free student membership, and then we have the associate membership, the full membership map, and we call it, and then fellowship. And fellowship, if you look at that, it's a bit different to other professional bodies. Our fellowship is all focused on giving back to the profession. Yeah. And that's why, because we understand that really membership is about that kind of being part of something bigger, kind of shifting the dial on the profession and making a contribution as much as the kind of products and services that you'll get out.
Absolutely. And I think you're making a fabulous, and from my own experience as a member, is that it's not just about, the wonderful research, of which there is loads out there, and the qualifications and getting things like that, but actually having the opportunity to network with a wide range of individuals and, like you say, contribute too. So I think that's really compelling for me in terms of membership. When you think about the qualification, I just want to touch on qualifications. A lot of people listening today of our learners or organisations we work with, there will be people working toward either the PMQ exam or have it from the past. And we all know you launched the new PMQ exam in September. And that's aligned itself towards the competency framework rather than the old book of knowledge, body of knowledge, sorry. What prompted some of those changes? First, to change the exam, and if people are thinking, is it still got the same currency as it had before? What would you be saying to people around that exam?
So on currency, yes, the rigour and the difficulty, if you like, of the exam has remained the same. Part of the reason it actually took us quite a long time to make the changes, that even though we'd started talking about this a couple of years ago, part of the reason it took us so long is because we needed to make sure that we didn't inadvertently lower standards or change something in a way that, oh, I did the easy version, oh, I did the hard version. So that we've kept that completely consistent along the way. The focus really was on accessibility, because actually the last big change we made to the PMQ was when we moved it from being a paper-based exam to a digital exam. And that, although we were doing that anyway, that was accelerated by the global pandemic. So it therefore meant we largely took what existed in the paper world and made it digital. And not everything, I think, translated as well as it should have done, particularly from an accessibility perspective. So sitting somebody down in front of a screen for 3 hours and saying, let's get the best out of you. Is that the way to get the best out of people? We found out that, we were getting reasonable adjustment requests for movement breaks quite often. And so the question comes then, if you're starting to get that level of reasonable adjustments, is it accessible enough in the first place? And so what we did is we took the approach that Apple Education use, actually, which is they look at what changes they can make, which will be vital for some people, but valuable for everybody. Vital for some, valuable for all. Which is how, by the way, their Siri tool became a mainstream kind of service. That was an accessibility device, accessibility feature originally. And of course, everybody uses it now, because who doesn't want to voice activate their, their phone and so on. And so things like movement breaks, they're now built in as standard for everybody who does the PMQ. You don't have to take it, but it's there for everybody if they want it. And we've taken that same approach. So all we've really done is made it more accessible, and therefore we're now seeing the pass rate is improved because it's a more accessible qualification. And that's an approach that we're trying to take right across the APM suite of products and services, which is, I call it, raising the level of ordinarily available provision. Because why wouldn't we want to be inclusive?
Yeah, absolutely. And that should be very reassuring for people. So the qualification itself still has the same recognition that it had before, etc., but we've made it more accessible to all as part of that process. What about the part of the decision to align it more to the competency framework rather than the body of knowledge? What was driving that, and is the body of knowledge still relevant for people?
So both are relevant. They both have fundamentally different purposes, I would say. I think the reality is that the competence framework is about what you do rather than what you know. And in reality, what are most people going to use in a day-to-day kind of project delivery? It's going to be the things they know how to do, and they want to get better at them. And so that's why it makes sense to start to align more to the competency framework. What I would say, though, is that it's not necessarily an either-or, because the reality is the new body of knowledge 8, will come out in April next year. And when that comes out, what you'll see is a much greater alignment between the competence framework and the body of knowledge. So I think it would be slightly unfair to characterise this as a move away from the body of knowledge to the competence framework, because it's more a greater alignment of all of the different frameworks that we have. So we almost have that single reference point via the competence framework.
Fantastic. So there's real synergy between the two. And I think things like data analytics and AI and things like that are also going to be coming into the new body of knowledge, because I think they are some of these topics that we're seeing that are taking much more precedence.
Although I'm not the editor of the body of knowledge, I would be, let me say, I would be very surprised if we didn't have AI and data analytics in there. I mean, just on the data analytics point, one thing we didn't talk about before was the kind of ethical side of that, because I think that's kind of important, because there's one of the kind of the the threats, if you like, to AI really kind of fulfilling its potential is this fear that people have that governments are going to step in and regulate technology and so on. So we've already started to see that, for example, with some of the social media platforms, in recent years. So will we see that kind of extend into AI itself? I think potentially, but probably not for the same reasons. I think it's going to be around issues of water security. So a statistic that some of your viewers might not be aware of is that for every 20 to 50 searches of something like ChatGPT or Gemini or something like that, it takes the equivalent of a 500 milliliter bottle of water to cool the data center. Now, I'm not saying that that's a problem, but actually it is a cost. And at the moment, people are just seeing it as it's free. I can just go to a website. It's like a Google search, right? I can just but it's not free in that sense. There is a cost, and it's this cost to water security. And data centers are already kind of in huge demand. And when quantum computing comes along, that's going to accelerate again. So I think you can make the case for using, AI to find the next cure for cancer. But can you really justify that kind of cost for if I'm going to use it to write bedtime stories for my 5-year-old or something? I don't know. Yeah. So I feel that there might be some regulation that comes for that reason. That said, the practical reality of trying to regulate something which is going to require global agreement in a context where there doesn't seem to be a lot of global agreement going on at the moment, I don't know. So we'll see what happens.
It's an evolving discussion there, I think. But actually that should reassure some, because it means it's not just an open-ended AI is going to be used for everything again. There are going to be constraints, as there always are in the world, that are also going to govern the efficacy with which we make decisions and what we choose to use it for, which I think is reassuring. And there's perhaps a link back to Charles. We were talking about qualifications and the PMQ, and obviously we've talked about regulation. I kind of want to bring those things together to the next level, the chartered professional, because obviously it was an amazing step back in, I think, 2017 that you got chartered status. What is the benefit of that for the profession and for people thinking about taking that route moving forward?
So, in terms of the benefits of that, we were talking earlier on about the kind of relative lack of maturity of the profession. One of the key milestones, if you like, on that kind of maturity journey is becoming chartered. That's, in my mind, when you become formally recognised as a profession in your own right. So it's not project management or the project profession as a part of something else. Yes, it exists in other areas, just like accountancy exists in other areas, but it is something in its own right. It's a profession that people can choose. So that's a really important moment for me back in 2017. But of course, there's this kind of lag then between, okay, someone said, no, you are now a profession, but who knows about it? So we've all heard of the chartered accountant, right? Even if we're not one, we know what it is. Absolutely. Who's heard of a chartered project professional? People in the profession, yes. People beyond the profession, not so much. So there is a big kind of PR campaign that needs to happen here to get the message out there. And the good news for people who are chartered or become chartered is they're becoming chartered at a point when chartership starts to kind of grow in terms of its gravitas, its recognition, and they become one of the first people to have it. So they will take a bit of time to kind of get a critical mass of people and to get that understanding, but that's coming. And we're back to the supply and demand conversation as well, because let's imagine that every organisation said now in their job descriptions, if we're going to employ a project professional, we don't just want any old project professional, we want a chartered one. Well, there aren't enough of them, right? There aren't enough of them yet. So we've got to kind of ramp up the supply and demand of chartered professionals and people asking for chartered project professionals at the same time. And that's the kind of the bit of the journey that we're on. But what a good problem to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about that from the point of view of the corporates that you work with, what's the benefits for them in, what assurance are they getting when they see chartered professional? What's it saying for them?
Yeah. So we're actually doing a piece of work on this at the moment to kind of quantify the return on investment, because the case for individuals is really clear. They get to work on bigger projects. They tend to be paid more. They kind of get better career development. So it's great for the individual. It's great for the public, right? Because we know that chartered project professionals are by definition more competent. So therefore, project success is greater. We can see the outcomes and making a difference to society. But trying to quantify to the CFO of an organisation, why should you spend your your money on getting the workforce chartered as a chartered project professional rather than some other qualification, that's a harder one to quantify. But what we do here are improvements in 5 tangible areas. The first one is we hear from our corporate partners who've invested in chartership for their workforce that there is a noticeable reduction in risk. The second one is that they see improved confidence in terms of delivery assurance. So that helps in terms of the kind of messaging that they can give to their clients and so on. Thirdly, we see a kind of a commercial advantage because particularly government, publicly funded, for publicly funded projects, they're asking in the tender process questions about, well, how qualified is your workforce? Are they chartered? So it's actually helping them to win business because they've got more chartered, because government themselves are also invested in this area. In fact, now, if you want to be reaching certain levels within government project delivery, you have to either be chartered or be a fellow. So they're kind of bought into this as well, and doing that. Fourthly, it's about recruitment and retention. So if you're investing in your workforce to get them chartered, then people feel invested, they're more likely to stay with you, and you're going to get higher quality of people coming to you because they want that investment. And then lastly, it's around ESG. So this is ethical, social governance. And what we're seeing is that there are tangible increases in organisations' ESG outcomes for those organisations where they've invested in chartership for their workforce versus those that haven't.
And that's obviously a very topical subject at the moment, which is all great news for our listeners. I mean, all of these, what's really compelling here, it's not just the individual case, but the corporate case that you've set out, are all really positives for the profession. I've got a question I just want to go back to, and we'll come back to the chartership, that we've had in someone asking a particular question around the PMQ, and just saying, does the PMQ have the same recognition as PMP from PMI here in the UK? What route would you advise someone with a PMP qualification to take in order to become APM chartered?
Okay, so there's 2 aspects there. So I'll do the second point first. So if you've already got the PMP qualification, there is a new pathway to chartership, which recognises the professional practice of either a PMP or a PMQ, and that pathway is on the APM website, so they can go on it. It basically gives them a shorter interview and means they only have to do the ethical aspect of the qualification and the interview around technical knowledge. So it's a different pathway. So that exists, and the details of that are on the website. In terms of comparing the PMP and the PMQ, I think a lot depends on the operating environment of where you are. So if we're talking about the UK, the PMQ is by far the most dominant qualification of the 2. And so, organisations will naturally default to that qualification. The reverse is true if we're talking about the US. And, we could talk about different parts of the world and make a similar distinction. That said, they both, I think, have a role to play. But the important point is, what do you do next? So you've got that knowledge and understanding, you've understood the processes and, you could pass the exam, great. How do you then move that on towards actually being competent in the role, being able to deliver in the role in the way that your organisation wants you to do and your clients expect you to do? And that's where chartership comes in. And that for me is the natural next step after you've done either of those qualifications, is to go on and become a chartered project professional.
And something I wanted to just pick up on briefly there, because I think it was a really good point. You mentioned the pathways, and obviously the 4 pathways, the details, as you said, are on the website. But actually that's really important that there are 4, just to make that. Obviously the APM, I think, has been quite forward-thinking in its drive to enable social mobility and access. So what would your comments be on that? If people are worried about, actually I'm in this kind of scenario, that scenario, can I be chartered? In terms of just providing some reassurance there.
Yeah, I mean, just to give some idea of the demographics on this, because I think that might be reassuring for your listeners and watchers. So the range of ages of people that have become chartered, I think the youngest person was 23, and the oldest person is 76. So you've got everything in between. So, this is not a kind of thing where you say you have to have done X number of years experience before you can become chartered. This is about stage, not age. And some people have been fortunate enough that even early in their career, they've been exposed to opportunities and had chances to demonstrate their competence in certain areas quite early on. So they can use that. Equally, there are others where that's actually taken a bit longer because they've come a different route. But my advice always to people who are thinking about chartered is this. Download the competence framework. It's freely available on the APM website. In fact, there is actually a tool as well to help you do this. And assess yourself against the competencies. Just do a kind of baseline assessment, see where the gaps are. And then you've got some sense of what you need to work on. Build that into your performance conversations with your employer and say, I really want to go for chartership. At the minute, I think I'm light on, these 3 areas. What can we do about it? Because it's in their interest to invest in you as well.
Yeah, and that's a real win-win then, because it's absolutely not only using the tools available to develop their own skill set, but also it becomes compelling for the organisations to consider chartership for the individual and to sponsor that, which would be a great development, I think.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. I think there was just checking a question here, but I think you've answered it already because it says, is there a recognisable equivalent of the chartership programme by any other relevant bodies or institutions? And if not, what would be the closest? Have you anything further that you'd add to that? Because I think you've really answered it.
I think I've kind of addressed that already. Clearly there are chartered standards in other professions, other adjacent professions, but in terms of the project profession itself, I think it's pretty unique.
Fantastic. Thank you. Just as because we're close to time and soon I'll be asking for a wrap up, but if sitting where you are now, what would you say are the most compelling challenges or skills that PMs are going to need? Are there challenges because we've got to address them, or skills that people need in the next 3 to 5 years that we might not have touched on? Are there any things that you think are going to be out there that we should be talking about?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've not touched on particularly today is sustainability. And you see, almost any survey you look at about, what are the top skills that are going to be needed in almost any profession, sustainability is in there, cybersecurity is in there, AI is in, so it's the same kind of basket of skills, if you like. But sustainability is an important one. And I think the problem is that sometimes people, when they think about sustainability, they default to environmental sustainability, which is one aspect of sustainability, but it's not the only one. And the truth is that sustainability just covers a broad range of things. And the reality is that, we talk about inclusion earlier on, for example. An organisation can't be sustainable unless it's also inclusive. So I think lots of the things we've talked about actually help to drive towards sustainability, but I do think project managers, project professionals more broadly, really focusing on, what's the value add that they bring to projects in terms of sustainability, not just of the project, but also of themselves. I did a talk last week in Bristol, and the focus was about beautiful projects. And I confess I had to really work hard to figure out what these beautiful projects were. But essentially what they were saying was you've got to deliver, possibly even over-deliver in terms of the iron triangle, time, cost, quality, and all of that, benefits realisation, all of that. But actually that alone is not enough. You've also got to do it in a way that makes the project sustainable and the people delivering the project. You've got to think about their sustainability as well. So we come back to thinking about, mental health and well-being, and how we're actually going to make sure that we're able to continue to deliver projects year in, year out. So I think the sustainability agenda is massive. And if I was a practicing project professional today, that's where I would be really focusing my efforts.
Yeah, and that's such an important question that around, because one of the criticisms often hailed at the project profession is it can be quite stressful, mental health can be an issue, and it means that the project managers themselves, their leadership role, and in terms of creating the right environment in which projects take place, is also going to be pretty important moving forward to ensure people do keep coming in.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's incumbent upon all leaders, not just those in projects, to do what they can to look after the health and well-being of their people. How do you do that? So I always like to think about creating a culture of what I call supported autonomy. In other words, not micromanaging people, but making sure that they know that you are there when they need you. And it's that whole psychological safety point about they can come to you and talk about when they're having problems without feeling like they're going to be judged or punished, if you like, for being open. And we need that because there are issues in our profession of things like strategic misrepresentation or lying, as it's sometimes called, where we actually need to encourage people to be able to speak truth to power and to be honest about the reality. I think Organisations that are developing a coaching culture, I think that that's a really powerful thing to think about health and well-being. And then I think the job of most leaders is just to focus on what are the barriers to health and well-being in my organisation, and how can I remove them to help people be able to get on and do what they need to do.
And certainly something I think we're going to hear a lot more about in projects, because I think that will continue to be a theme if we want to keep it a good profession to work within. We're really reaching that time. We've almost run out of time. There's so much more we could talk about. But in terms of very parting words today, it's been a joy actually talking to you. But what would be your parting words of wisdom to anyone listening today that maybe is thinking about taking the next step? What would you be encouraging them to do at this point?
Well, whether you're in the profession or already or thinking of coming into the profession, it won't surprise you to hear me say you definitely need to get qualified. If you're not chartered already, get chartered. And I'd probably end up by saying also bring a friend, because we need all the project professionals we can get, so get them in as well and get them qualified and chartered too.
Fantastic. Well, look, Adam, thank you so much for your time today. We didn't get through all the questions, but we got through a lot of them. So thanks everybody for answering those questions. And hopefully you'll come back again at some point in the future and talk to us again as the changing picture evolves.
Of course, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Finally today, just to let you all know that if you haven't been able to get along today, if you've got colleagues that would like to come, you will be able to watch the webinar again on the Provek site at www.provek.co.uk. So thank you for joining, and we'll see you all again soon.